but we're going to get started just like we should. So, good morning, everybody. I'm Keith Mathis. Welcome to our webinar this morning. The title that we're dealing with today is going to be Making It Stick, Ensuring Lessons Learned Becomes Lessons Applied. One of the things that I'm interested in and have been interested in is that why is it that we're doing all these lessons learned and archiving information and then we don't really use it for any reason? And so I think you're going to see a huge change in the across the world since PMI has started emphasizing lessons learned and retrospectives a lot more. They've also started emphasizing it more in your PMP boot camps with the new changes that are coming out in July. And so with all of that, you start realizing, okay, there is something more to a lessons learned and retrospective than what we are typically seeing, where we basically do it, if we do it at all, and some of us haven't done it, and then a lot of times we don't use it for anything. So with AI coming in and the ability to be able to use it to give us summaries or overviews of some of these projects, it will actually benefit us in some of these ways, I think. So today I wanted to really focus on what are we talking about and what are we really trying to do when we do a lessons learned or retrospective. And so I want to give you some suggestions that I think might help you a little bit as we start working on this. So today we're talking about making it stick, ensuring lessons learned becomes lessons applied. As you look at the whole issue of lessons learned and retrospectives, it really fits into PMI's mindset of continuous improvement. Because what we should be doing with a lessons learned and a retrospective is taking that lessons learned and then turning around and making it go to the point to where we take it and put it into action over here at the very end, and we continually improve. Continuous improvement has been a big jump in the test and also in the mindset of PMI. Everything we do should be driving toward continuous improvement. So I wanted to start off today and talk about some of the threats to organizational improvement in particular. So let's talk about these for just a moment. So the first would be a symptom. We have no problems here. And so I'm sure you've been with people who, well, we don't have problems around our organization, and that's great. The problem with that, the problem with having no problems is blindness. Blindness to waste, to problems, have become white noise. And so everybody has gotten to such a point to where they have decided that there's not really anything to that. The second symptom that we might see in an organizational improvement would be short-term delivery focus. We're focused on hitting the due dates. We're focused on delivering what the customer wants. Everything is short-term, and we're not really thinking about the longevity of how we can work some of these challenges that continue to happen over and over again out so that we don't have to mess with those. That's what continuous improvement is focused on. So the disease financial goals constantly override Kaizen or continuous improvement investments. And so we're looking at short term rather than long term, which is something that actually can hurt us over time. The other piece is going to be, the other symptom is sprints skip retrospectives. Now, just like a regular project will skip the lessons learned, we have a lot of sprints who skip the retrospective, which is a learning capability in Agile to allow you to be able to learn from the last sprint and impact and influence the future sprints that you're going to be doing. But once again, we have that, there's an undercurrent of lack of belief that anything's going to happen. It's busy work, and so we have a tendency not to think that anything's going to happen. And so the lack of protected momentum and dedicated improvement and resources is all part of it. We feel the pressure so much for speed that we don't think we have time to do a retrospective, is what I'm trying to say. And so if we don't do the retrospective, then we don't have any projections as to what did we learn from the previous sprints. And then the last one here, management dictates the fixes. The disease that we're looking at on this side would be zero team ownership, leading to passive compliance instead of active improvement. So what we're going to be focusing on by the end is actively driving some of these changes. And so it's not management solve the problem and management decide to fix it. It's the employee and the team members are seeing the problem and deciding to fix it. That's what we should be and are trying to be going to. The other piece that happens that I wanted to talk about that has come up in so many different pieces of reading and researching is the fear of blame. If I point something out, there's that blame of who's in trouble for pointing these things out, or who's in trouble because it's not working right. And so that has scared people off. And so what happens is no news is good news is kind of how we're treating this thing. And the problem is it's not good news, it's bad news. So this idea of zero blame retrospectives and zero blame lessons learned has to be part of the culture. And that's a culture change. Management has to be part of that. The employees have to have buy-in. And so this is defined as shifting from a fault-finding mindset to an opportunity for improvement mindset. Huge deal. Because if we're looking at an opportunity for improvement, then these ideas and these maybe even negative comments that somebody brings up about the elephant in the room is not going to be a problem. Because when you're looking at it, you're thinking, okay, you know what, let's talk about this a little bit, because we continue to have this this same silly problem over and over again, and we're putting out the fire every 6 or 8 weeks or every 2 or 3 projects. The focus is going to be on the problem, not the person. And that's that zero blame. In other words, I don't care who brings it up. Let's bring it up and talk about it. I don't care what we need to do to fix it, but let's fix it. And so I'm not chewing out an employee because something's happening bad. Zero blame. But zero blame goes a little bit deeper too. So let's go into it talk about the culture piece. How did it get there in the first place? It got there because we want people to be responsible and accountable. And so then what happens sometimes is that it's almost like fault finding all the time. So the idea of changing that culture means that when we talk about there being a problem or an issue, we assume positive intent, that everyone did the best job possible. In other words, nobody showed up that day thinking, okay, how can I screw the project up? Nobody's thinking that. And so they were doing the best job possible. Everything went haywire. Here's what happened. What can we do so it doesn't happen again? So practice confession and appreciation exercises where the team applauds after each story. This is a cool environment when you see this, because when people say, here's what happened, here's what I did, I thought it was right, but it wasn't even close. People will self-blame or criticize themselves for making a bad or a poor decision. And you want to appreciate that, because that's a growing team member, and you're growing, and then the continuity of your culture and your team is growing. And so you want to applaud that. And so when you've got people who can self-confess and appreciate that they've learned and grown from that. Integrate thinking to keep viewpoints in a win-win solution. So when we're talking about this integrated thinking, we're talking about what we tried, what we should have tried, and what we could do next time. Everyone's growing, management included, but everyone is growing. Also, be a role model and lead out with risk-taking individual topics. So in other words, it's not just you guys are learning and growing. I'm growing with you. I might be the person you're reporting to, but I'm growing just like you are. And what can we learn from this? When we have this level of atmosphere, it is a phenomenal atmosphere to be able to work in. As we continue with zero blame retrospectives, let me show you a graphic that I put some of the information in, and actually used ChatGPT for my graphics this week so that you could see some of these. I thought it might teach it a little bit better for me. So zero blame retrospective and lessons learned. Now you'll notice in this graphic on the left-hand side the components of zero blame. That means we're not going to be blaming. You might think, well, if we're not going to blame somebody, then we're not holding anybody accountable, which is not true. You're holding them accountable. You can always talk to them about their performance and their behavior. But zero blame means that we're not focused on trying to find somebody at fault so that we've got to blame. We're trying to fix the problem, put the fire out. It's what we're trying to do. So notice all the different sides of components of zero blames. It's psychologically safe. Think about that. If your atmosphere was psychologically safe and your workers feel like they could bring anything up, they could bring anything to you, they could talk about any of these things, and that somebody isn't going to jam them up with it, then what happens? It changes everything, because they are seeing everything that's happening around them. Focus on process, not personal fault. Curiosity, open questions. What if we tried it a different way? You don't feel like you're breaking, somebody's back because we're doing a process maybe a little differently than we've ever done it. Because we are evolving as a company, and we are evolving also as personal people who are growing there. Respectful communication, shared ownership of improvement, learning over punishment. So we're not fearful of a mistake drawing a punishment or somebody being terminated. We look at it as, okay, I've learned how not to do it now. I know that wasn't a good decision. And so that helps you with this. Notice the cycle of zero blame when you look at this. Review the facts, explore contributing factors, capture lessons learned, agree on improvements, apply in the future work, and then set the tone. begin with that psychological safety and end with that psychological safety, because it's going to run all the way around as you deal with this. And when you build psychological safety, people will talk about anything that they are sensing or picking up on, and they're not expecting anybody to once again go after them as the culprit of why it's happening or not happening in that way. Over on the right hand side, you'll notice the questions that we would be asking. The questions are: what happened? What helped us succeed? What made the work harder? What have we learned from this? And what will we do differently next time? Now, we're going to talk about questions a little bit more too, but my point in showing you this on the graphic was to kind of paint the picture in an overview setting for you to be able to say, what we should be moving toward is a best practice, moving toward lessons learned, moving toward we're constantly learning and growing. So that causes us to challenge and work with this navigating the change chasm. So if you look at this, innovators and early adopters, where change begins, protect them, let them build the proof of concept. The proof of concept is an important piece. And those of you who are working on agile projects right now, this is one of the places where you are. You don't even know what you don't know about AI. So you're working through this of how to be able to do it. This past week, I just had such a good time in Washington, D.C. with FAA testing a new program called AI in Action, how to successfully implementing artificial intelligence into your organization. And so that was with Dieter and his group there in FAA. And we just had such a good time walking through this 3-day program. But that's what's happening right now. We're in that innovative mode in so many of these cases because we don't know much about AI. We don't know how it's going to affect our industry or our group. And so we're trying to do this, but it is trial and error in some cases. We want perfection, but perfection isn't realistic. Notice the chasm where change initiatives die without sustained protected energy. And so when you start seeing this, nobody's going to try something new if all of a sudden we switch over to the blame game. Okay, if it's not working, then it's your fault. It's not a fault thing, it's a learning thing. We are trying to evolve as we are working and learning some of these things. Then notice that the early majority requires small proven wins and psychological safety to cross over. That's that hurdle that we're needing. If we want our companies to be innovative in the future, then we've got to have that psychologically safe environment for people to bring up and talk about the elephant in the room. If not, we're just going to rubber stamp stuff and say what we think management wants to know and just go along with the flow. And so we're not going to challenge the way we've ever done business. And it's those challenges that's going to make a huge difference. Notice skeptics and laggards. Ignore the laggards. Listen carefully to the skeptics to find a valid barrier. Now, as much as we don't like negative people, if you've ever been around Ned and Nellie the negaholic, we all have, haven't we? Here's the thing, is that there's an element of truth in some of what they say. If we would really be honest, sometimes there is an element of truth. Now, man, they drive us nuts. And it drives us nuts and sucks down a lot of time. But the thing is that if we can get those kernels of truth out of what they say, it will benefit us in being able to put some of these other fires out as we go along. So let's look at the learning versus logging divide. Many people who are talking about and looking at some of these things about lessons learned and retrospectives, they look at it as just a typical checklist type thing. And it could be, it might be that way. So let's start off first off with the cargo cult trap. So many teams mimic the ceremonies of retrospectives without actually changing the underlying culture or process. You remember Groundhog Day, the old movie, where every day he woke up and the exact same stuff happened? That's kind of like some of our companies sometimes. And so not trying to be mean or rude, but let's call it the way it is. Sometimes it doesn't matter. We filled out 50 of those lessons learned. We made recommendations in 50 of those lessons learned, and nothing has changed. It is Groundhog Day. We do what we did before. How did we do it last time? We do it that way again. And in some cases, that might be fine. But when we're talking about especially putting in artificial intelligence in the future and those new projects, new technology, we need to do something differently. Our companies are different today than they were 10 years ago, 5 years ago. And so you're wanting definitely be able to do this. Second would be the definition of success. A lesson is not truly learned until it has been used to improve a process or a behavior. What a great definition this is. Because what we're trying to do is become better. We're trying to become better as a worker, as a manager, as a supervisor, as a project manager, as a business analyst. We're trying to become better. And so a lesson is not truly learned. Just because we documented it doesn't mean that we're using it. Just because we documented it doesn't mean my behavior is acting differently. And so the sustainability imperative. So sustainable change requires a process state of mind where feedback is viewed as an essential resource for long-term survival. We want the feedback, even though it might be negative and we don't like the negative feedback, we want that in order for us to be better in the future. And so that's going to help us be able to take those next steps. As much as we don't like criticism, criticism is what changes us. Because once we can pick those kernels out without the emotion, without the negativity, without people, going after us personally, then we're able to look at that and think of how can I change in the future? And our organizations and our project teams can do that. Let's look at it a little further here. So what do lessons learned often fail? Why do lessons learned often fail to change? Well, the first is the organization maybe captures the retrospective of the lessons learned, but does not change the system. Our processes are treated like the Holy Grail. Our management doesn't want to talk about making any changes. Just do the work. Productivity, we want productivity to be the highest possible. And I get that. But the problem with that is eventually productivity is going to start coming lower. And the reason is because we're out of sync with some of the things that would have made us better. Lessons are vague and unmeasurable. So we talk about being better, being faster, being more cost effective. We use all the buzzwords, don't we? But the end result is we really didn't put a metric in there that we could really measure with a quantifiable measurement. No one owns the lessons learned and assumes that someone else will take it and lead them. A lot of times the team feels like they don't have the power, so they put the lessons learned and make the recommendations, assuming management's going to do something with this. And yet it really needs to be that tag team effort with management and the team on this thing. Workers are rewarded for delivering, not learning or changing. And yet we need to continue to be upskilled and reskilled and continue to grow as a worker. Organizational culture protects comfort and status quo more than truth and change. We have to challenge status quo. You're going to see more challenges in the status quo probably in your next 5 years than ever before. You've got IT people coming in and saying, we do not have the skills to be where we need to be in the next 5 years. If you are in IT, that ought to be something that would cause great dilemma on you because you think, okay, I need to get upskilled. And so we need to start moving in that direction. And lessons learned and retrospectives are going to be a piece of it. Lessons remain trapped inside one project. And we see this happening for those organizations who don't have PMOs. It is real easy for that to happen. We learn these things here in this project, but these other projects could benefit from it, but it never goes across and to any other project. There's never a discussion among project managers. There's never a discussion disseminated to other projects. And that does become a little bit of a problem. So let's talk about necessary behaviors for organizational change. The first is going to be empowerment and ownership. The days of holding everything under your thumb and controlling every literal decision is really, really difficult for some projects today. We're wondering why our projects are taking so much time and costing so much. A lot of it is an empowerment issue, not a knowledge issue. You got great team members, but we won't let them go. We won't let them free. Let me give you an example. If you were ever watching someone raise a teenager who's getting ready to go to college, and that mom and dad made every decision for that teenager didn't make a decision for anything at all. What do you expect that teenager to do down the road when you finally cut them loose? And so what happens is a lot of times we've got teenagers who are going off to college and they're making crazy decisions. How was their decisions? Did we prepare them before they went to college? And so sometimes that's one of the things that happens. No, not all the time. Sometimes kids make bad decisions regardless of good parents and how we raise them and how we train them. My point is not on good parent, bad parent. My point is on the training. Training those kids to make decisions as they went through grammar school and high school and giving more decisions and more empowerment. Finally, when they get to college, it's not something new to them. It's just another stage of new empowerment. And that's what we should be doing with our workers, training them in baby steps all the way that we've had them with a little bit more empowerment, a little bit more decision-making power, so that when they get to this other level, they are empowered and it's not crazy to them. So shifting responsibility from improvement from management appointed roles to the entire team changes the mindset. I get to make decisions. I get to decide. We get to decide. Every member must feel they have the authority to stop the line when quality is comprised. So when I was putting this together, do you remember when Saturn first came out? One of the things that they showed is that they showed the assembly line of Saturn, and on Saturn that the person could pull the cord and stop the assembly line. And so when they did that, one of the things about it was they put a pin. It was just a little pin that they noticed was not under the hood. And I started thinking about that. And of course, we don't have Saturn today, but I thought that was just really great. That was such an interesting piece. Why? Because they had power to stop it without being in trouble. So that's empowerment and ownership. The other piece of this would be absence of fear, the no blame culture. So if we have an absence of fear that I'm going to be blamed, I'm going to be much more vocal on what I'm seeing and why I'm seeing this. You see, your team is an extension of us. Their eyes, their ears, their hands, they see stuff we don't see. So organizational change is impossible if transparency leads to a blame game like we talked about. Teams must assume positive intent and view failures as opportunities for validated learning. So if we fail in an area, this is an area that we need to train people on maybe. Maybe this is an area we need to talk about. What steps should we follow? Somebody maybe doesn't understand these 5 steps in our process. Maybe they don't understand what they should be doing. Let's talk about the discipline of reflection. We all have a tendency to look back over our life at different points and decide we would have done something different, wouldn't we? And so leaders must value reflection over mere repetition. Understanding that wisdom is gained by pausing to turn experience into insight. That's what a lessons learned does. That's what a retrospective does. It pauses people for reflection. If you had it to do over based on what you know now, what would you do? Would you do it the same? Would you do it differently? And you're not asking for perfection, but yet so many times we think and we treat people like we are asking for perfection. A commitment to follow up. So change fails most often because teams do not sustain energy beyond the initial retrospective meeting. So that's what we were talking about. We do the retrospective, but it goes into a file or it goes into a system and nobody ever brings it back up. And so what happens? The next project happens, we do the next retrospective, similar stuff happens that's just as bad, but we never touch it again. We never bring it back up. And then the next project comes along and the next stuff happens and it's almost the same as what those other 3 did. What's wrong with this? We are continuing to fill the same hole over and over again without learning from it. So no behavior change, no culture change, but it did suck down our time in 3 projects when one would have probably fixed a lot of it. Just something for you to think about is all I'm trying to do. So let me show you what I'm talking about here. So there's some techniques for capturing actionable lessons rather than just going through the motions. And so you've got 5 different techniques. And I know you're not going to be able to read this just right, so I'm going to break it apart for you here in a moment. So these are techniques for capturing actionable lessons learned. So you've got the gap analysis that you've heard of, fact versus perspective, a reconciliation. We've got qualified for actionability. We've also got the root cause analysis, which I know all of you on this call are familiar with. And then we're going to be talking a little bit about integrative thinking. So let me present and break these apart so you can see each of these 5 a little better here. So before I do that, let's start off with the gap analysis. Everything you're doing in a retrospective and lessons learned is really a light gap analysis, because what you're doing is you're talking about what you did compared to what you would do now. That's a big difference. So what is the current state? And what evidence confirms it? What is the desired future state, our required standard? What is the measurable gap between the current state and the desired state? What is the root causes for the gap that you see right now? What risk or consequences will occur if the gap is not addressed? What actions, owners, resources, timelines are needed to close that gap? See, when we talk about a gap can be a lot of different things. It can be where we are compared to where we want to be. So we're talking about change theory. But it can also be where we are compared to where we want to be because we're talking about change in behaviors, change in actions, it may be even change in performance. And so that's why gap theory is such a gap analysis and gap theory is such a big deal, because it takes us from where we are to where we think we want to be. So let's look at these a little bit more here. So if we look at what is the current state, so this reduces the likelihood of making assumptions, forming opinions, or distorting historical memory. You look at metrics, performance levels, observations, interviews. What is our current state? And so that way we know exactly where we are. The other side of this is going to be, what is the desired future state? The gaps cannot be defined clearly unless the target is specific. So you clarify what success looks like. So like, for an example, if you went to college, then when you started, they gave you a plan to get you through college with the degree you wanted. And so what are you looking at? You looked at your future state. You looked at your future state, which was the degree. You looked at your current state, and it gave you steps to be able to get there. And so you had a gap. When you started off, you didn't have all the hours to graduate. By the time you finished, you had every hour you needed. What is the measurable gap? So this question forces precision. Describe the gap in observable or measurable terms. And so that way we know quantifiably what's happening or what's not happening. You also then look at what is the root cause. So avoid jumping straight to solutions. This question encourages a deeper analysis of why the gap exists. And so it causes you to look at the root cause, typically doing that 5 why analysis and asking why 5 times and drilling down to that lowest level typically will allow you to be able to solve the root cause. And then the other one is going to be, this question helps to prioritize action. Not every gap deserves the same level of investment. So what risk or consequences will occur if the gap is not addressed? And so if it's something that's not that big of a deal, you might not choose to invest time into it. The bigger the deal it is, obviously we're going to invest more time. And then the last one here, where you talk about owners, what actions, owners, resources, and timelines are needed to close the gap. This shifts analysis into execution. And that's where we stop with some of our lessons learned. A lessons learned might do analysis. We might write all the stuff down. We might make all the recommendations. But if we're not shifting to execution to put some of these lessons learned into place, we are not continuing to improve in the area of project management. So let's start with our first one, the gap analysis. For every significant event, define the expected result, the actual result, and the gap. Expected result, what would have happened? Actual result, what actually happened? And the gap, what is the difference? And why does it matter? And so an example of this would be expected approval in 3 days. It actually took 10 days. There's a 7-day delay. And you might think, well, this is not a decent example. Let me tell you something. When those of you are working on projects and you're waiting for somebody to sign off on this silly thing, this sucks down project time because the due date a lot of times does not change. And so you're waiting for somebody to approve this. This is huge. You lost 7 days of project time right off the top. And that's not the best place to lose this. So the gap analysis is looking for where it is compared to where it actually is. And a lot of times people in their mind thinks that this is all okay. This is happening and you know how it is. And we even have comments. Well, you know how it is. When it gets to that department, it takes forever for them to sign off. Maybe it does right now, but what can we do differently so it doesn't happen in the future? The second one's going to be fact versus perspective reconciliation. Before logging a lesson, reconcile the different team perspectives to find a shared truth. We all have a different perspective on different things. And so what facts do we agree on? Where do our perspectives differ? Because a lot of times we draw conclusions on what has happened. And so I think this is causing this problem. You think something else is. We need to talk about it and kind of get all these out on the table. What evidence helps us to form a shared truth? Why do we think this is what is happening? And so what are we basing this on? What evidence? The goal would be to move from opinion and blame to evidence and alignment. And so this is what's happening. This is the evidence we have. And so let's start working on trying to fix that. Fact versus perspective. And sometimes that's very wrong. Third one is going to be qualified for actionability. A lesson should enter the register only if it is significant and clear enough for someone else to implement. Significant more than a normal operational noise, and actionable, documented clearly enough for a third party to apply it. Now, when they're saying third party, they mean somebody not on your team. So can somebody not on your team take that action and put it into play for a project, for the next projects? If it cannot drive change, it is not ready for the register. You're talking about the lessons learned register or the retrospective register, because what you're looking at is we haven't done enough due diligence to explain it. And nobody else has worked on that project who's going to be reading it if they read it at all. And so down the road, you're wanting your lessons learned to be readable. And so your AI tools will have access to some of this in the future, and they'll give you summaries and overviews and steps of action, good and bad, that they did in the last project. That's why you're needing your documents and data to be so much better. The fourth is going to be the typical root cause analysis that we've all seen. Move past symptoms and identify addressable causes. And so you do the 5 why analysis, where you ask why 5 times to get down to that root cause. So you keep asking why until the underlying cause is exposed. And so you use a fishbone or an Ishikawa map contributing across categories. The focus is on the causes the team or organization can address. And so you're looking at what has driven some of these particular changes or some of these problems. And then we start creating changes for them. The fifth is going to be integrative thinking. Do not settle for choosing one side over another. Seek a win-win architecture that preserves the best features of opposing viewpoints. What value does each option bring? What tension must be resolved? How can we design a better combined solution? So best practice often comes from integration, not compromise. And so it allows us to integrate the ideas, not just give up something so everybody agrees. So integrative thinking is one of the things that does happen on your lessons learned and in your retrospective as people are talking about what we did good and what we did bad and maybe what we could do differently. So let's shift now from learning to changing, because this is a gap. We learn a lot of stuff. We talk about all the things that went wrong on our projects, and we'll talk about people too, and sometimes too, don't we? And so now let's talk about how can we go about changing some of this to where we're not just doing the same old, same old. So the first piece of this, as we talk about lessons learned and retrospectives, turning insight into continuous improvement. This is really where PMI is going. That's why you're going to see a bigger emphasis on lessons learned and on the retrospective is because of this right here. So this is the reason you're doing a retrospective and lessons learned is to drive change. So first, capturing the event, compare expected versus actual, reconcile the facts and perspectives, analyze the root causes, define actionable lessons, assign actions and owners, and then embed it into the organization, and then measure and revisit. You're measuring to see did anything change. That is listed as a good continuous improvement cycle of learning, action, and behavior change. If we are not getting to behavior change, then all we're doing is spinning our wheels with some of these ideas and some of these thoughts. So how do we shift? Shifting to lessons applied. So next, let's talk about gain more feedback throughout the project at the phase gates or natural break points to influence the current project's trajectory. So this would be your traditional projects. If we're having phase gates, then what we're doing is making decisions. That's going to be a decision point in all of our projects. And so you're wanting feedback at that point. And so a lot of times people think, well, lessons learned is only going to happen at the end of a phase, or it's only going to happen at the end of the project. And it could do that. But you could be doing it. You could do a lessons learned at the end of a phase gate if you chose to, for what have we learned from this phase? What can we learn at the next phase? The other piece would be updating the ways of working. When a better method is found, immediately inform the team and begin adjusting it. Why? Because once again, you're breeding in that behavior and that action, and people are seeing that, and you're going to want some of that to happen. The other would be use Kaizen boards and information radiators, especially on the Agile side, because these are going to be visible boards and backlogs that everyone can see, so they can see the progress that you're making with your team as you move through so many of these. Next, reserve specific time to improve. The team will be able to work specifically on applying lessons learned. And what that does is that shows the emphasis for management and project managers and the team, and a commitment to this, because this is where we're actually talking about some of the behaviors and actions that are going to be different in the future projects or even in this project because of what we've learned. Next, the last piece would be tacit knowledge transfer. You remember, tacit knowledge is the knowledge that we bring to the table that we're learning from a project. It's coming from the inside of us out is what's going to happen. So try to create some kind of breakfast forum, afternoon debriefs to share stories behind the lessons learned, as storytelling is more effective at changing behavior. But the point is that we don't feel like we have time for this kind of thing. So we'd rather make the mistake again, put out the fire for the 14th time, than take a few moments for us to be able to do this. And this does not have to be something that's happening every week, but it could be something that we are doing once a quarter, to where we're learning from some of this knowledge transfer, tacit knowledge transfer from each other. What can I learn from you? If you've done a project that's different than mine, that has some real specifics to it, and for me to be able to hear some of the things that you talk about and hear some of the ways that you took care of it, what a marvelous way of being able to freely learn new project management skills and to become better. Next, let's talk about the 4 vectors of knowledge transfer. So when we talk about knowledge transfer, one of those could be mentoring. So you have deep tacit. So it's coming from the knowledge, the inside of the other person. This is typically an experienced person who's working with maybe someone with less experience. So transferring deep experience and instinct person to person over time. And so we meet for 30 minutes, 30 minutes a week or an hour a week, whatever it is. Mentoring has gotten much more popular since millennials have come into the workplace, and now you've got Zs coming in. Baby boomers, a lot of times, were real cautious about mentoring because they're afraid about giving their information away. And so mentoring has become a long way because we want to, the millennials in particular, are wanting to learn that information. The second would be collaboration. Tacit and explicit. Now, explicit knowledge is knowledge that you're reading. As you look at this slide, this is explicit knowledge. We've written it down. We've put it on a screen so that you can see this. That's explicit. Tacit knowledge is the behind-the-scenes stuff that I'm telling you and talking about what you see out here, what's happening that's not written down. So cross-functional pairings and shadowing to spread skills naturally through daily work. So it could be we do a 1 hour briefing or a 1 hour training each month so that people can actually have explicit information, a course. But the tacit is where we have paired people together to be able to benefit them. Third one's going to be lessons learned meetings. So you've got explicit and tacit. And so notice here, it's more explicit because we're writing it all down, and then tacit is coming in from what the people have, the perspective of the people there. So facilitating group reflection to capture collective insights before they fade. And then last would be documentation. This is almost all explicit. And the reason is because it's documentation. And so you're updating the issue register, wiki, standard operating procedures. A lot of times people say, well, we're doing Agile. We don't document. That's a bunch of silliness. Of course you document. You've got some documentation. That's why you're doing a retrospective at the end of each sprint or iteration. So of course you do some documentation. So when people say that, that's just silliness. You don't do as much documentation as you do in a traditional project, but you're definitely doing some documentation in an Agile project. So let's talk about synthesis. So as you continue to do this, you're trying to take the information and the tacit knowledge that you've learned from people and the explicit knowledge, and you're trying to weave it together into something that's going to be beneficial for your team, but also for your organization. And so that's the synthesis we're talking about. And you're trying to get into that continuous evolution of loop to where you're working and learning. So improvement's not just a project phase you finish, it is a permanent operational state of learning and growing and doing those type of things. And I thought this was just a great depiction of that as we're looking at it here, because it starts off, it shows you some of the knowledge transfer, identifying root cause, mentoring, collaborating. You're also updating the documentation and also establishing new standards of working. We should be different next year than we are this year. Our skills should be different. In 3 years, we ought to be even more different because of what we know and what we've learned. Now, let's talk about some tips for sustaining that type of change. We have a tendency to backslide, don't we? We will backslide and start doing everything the old way, just because it feels better. It fits us. So let's talk about how to hold on to this other. So first off, sustaining the change. Role models walk the talk. How do we act? Do we do what we're supposed to do? So include documented lessons learned in your own decision making. So if people are seeing you as an experienced person with the lessons learned, or as an executive attending some of the lessons learned, you're putting up some punch behind that statement. You're showing that it is high enough priority that you're investing some time into it too. You're not attending every lessons learned maybe, but you're attending some of those. The secret though is really in the implementation. We can attend lessons learned until the cows come home, but that does not make any difference on the organization if we're not implementing it. And a lot of times what we're doing is a lessons learned or retrospective and putting it into an archive, and then nothing happens, nothing changes. And that's one of the worst things that can happen, because that is busy work, and it definitely feels that way. So lessons learned registers are implemented into new processes rather than keeping a long, massive list. And the purpose behind that is so that we can implement something as fast as possible and benefit the organization and benefit your team. The other thing that I think would help you is, as you look at this, Agile team's way of working. So here you're looking at several different pieces from an Agile perspective. So sprint planning, daily stand-ups, collaborative delivery, reviewing and demo, and the retrospective, and then lessons learned and update the ways of working. Now, your retrospective and lessons learned are really almost identical. Your retrospective is typically what is called on the Agile side but it might be being fed into an overarching lessons learned for the program and or multiple projects. And so that's fine. And then as you do all this and get back around, you notice that it's active inclusion into the next sprint. So by the time we go back to sprint planning for the next sprint, that we have made that complete cycle. And it should be that, because we have learned from sprint 1. We have learned from sprint 2. We have learned from sprint 3. And that's what we should be looking at and doing. So when we talk about ways of working, so ways of working, just I thought I'd give you this manifesto. I thought it was interesting. So the logistics, time, environment, time of punctuality, workspace harmony, team dynamics, collaboration and information. So radical collaboration and knowledge transparency. We share anything and everything. And then cultural values. We assume positive intent, no blame zone. We want our people to be part of it. We want them to share it, even if what they're sharing might not be 100% right. It's their perspective. And then the definition of done, which is going to be on the Agile side, is where we talk about what that project should look like, how it should function at its end, the definition of done. And so that's what the customer has been sharing with the product owner as we've been working on this. The other piece of this that you might be influencing you is the Kaizen path. Now, Kaizen in Japanese stands for continuous improvement, and so the foundation of the Kaizen culture allows you to be able to see this. And so this is culture over ceremony, and so you're avoiding cargo cult behaviors, mimicking agile rituals without changing the underlying values or mindset. So what you're doing is trying to change the organization from the inside out. And so that's a very powerful thing. And then over on the right-hand side, you'll notice you're looking at mastering knowledge transfer. We share everything. And so if you're having trouble with something and I can help you with it, I help you with it. It might not be something that I'm having to do that's in my job description, but I help you because I want you to be able to know this and understand this. And so it allows us to be able to freely share on those skills. So let's move into best practices for lessons learned and retrospectives. So best practices for lessons learned and retrospectives is going to be timing and structure. We don't feel like we've got enough time, so we struggle with this. So timing, making sure we have time at the end of a sprint to do a demo and a retrospective. The demo show is a show and tell, what new technology, what new features, and the retrospectives is what we've learned. So that's right before you hand that little piece off to the customer team to start working with. The other is going to be environmental and cultural safety. Obviously, this is going to continue to evolve us, and it's going to should be continuing to make our environment that much more team friendly, but also much safer in the future as well. And then actionable analysis. We're giving good analysis and good next steps to be able to fix some of this. And then you're looking at protect learning capacity. So we're continuing to learn. We're learning from each other, and so we're not allowing somebody to be negative toward the person. We can be negative about anything we talk about, but not toward that person. And then integrating with organizational culture. A lessons learned should impact our culture. A lessons learned should impact our culture, and it changes it for the better. And then create proper documentation. And that's going to be different on the project. It could be different per organization and per industry. Some of you do have a lot of documentation. Some of you not so much, and that's okay. And that's what you're trying desperately to do, is create whatever level of documentation you need. So let's start talking about timing and structure. So you conduct lessons learned as close to the project phase, sprint, milestone, or actual work to facilitate accurate feedback. Agile projects need retrospectives at the end of each sprint. Project-based work needs lessons learned at major phase gates, and again at closure. So you're wanting your people to get as close as possible. Sorry about that. You want your people to do a lessons learned as close as possible to the work, because that's where they're going to remember it. That's where they know the most. Environmental and cultural safety. Create that blame-free environment. Focus on processes before personalities. Protect psychological safety. Clarify confidentiality expectations. Use quieter voices when discussing challenges, issues, or failure areas. And then watch for cultural barriers, somebody who's protecting the turf. And so what do we need to do to work with that person or to confront some of that? Also, actionable analysis. Move past examining symptoms and look for the root of the problem. Require evidence where possible. Why are we saying this? Rather than just that we believe this, I believe this is the problem. Okay, that's great. I want my team to say that, but why? What are you basing that decision on? Well, I just feel that way. That's not going to be good enough. We need to look at something that's going to be much more reasonable, much more quantifiable. Require evidence and prioritize based on impact and feasibility. Convert lessons into clear actions, and then assign ownership. Who's going to take that and run with it? The other piece is going to be protected a learning capacity. Avoid overloading the team with extra meetings by building lessons learned into current structure. Preserve what worked well. Give the team time to think about the session, create the space for emotional processing, build learning as part of the normal work routine. Sometimes we get too many meetings where our people don't feel like they can even hardly work on their project because we've got too many meetings happening. So don't create another meeting here. Work this into another meeting that you're already doing, and do it in less than 10 minutes to where you can pass on some of these things. Lessons learned can generate a lot in a very short period of time. You don't need 4 hours for every lessons learned. If it was a major thing that went bust, maybe, but you're not needing all that time on most of the projects we're working on. So then next, integrate with the organizational culture. Adjust the lessons learned with organizational values. Ensure leadership reinforces the process. Make a learning part of project governance. Share the lessons with other teams. Reward learning behavior. And then create a culture that's easy to admit mistakes. And why is it easy to admit mistakes? Because it's blame-free. Nobody's going to be on their back because they had a hiccup on the project. And that's going to help that culture change to where people love working there. And if you're having high turnover, that might be part of the reason turnover's happening. If it's blame game for everything, that's going to hurt the turnover. And so you're going to be getting a constant free fall of people leaving that type of organization. Create proper documentation. Document lessons in a standard format or template so that they can be compared across other projects. You're going to see this become even more detailed as AI comes in. AI runs off of data. Data has to be standardized to some extent for AI to be able to read some of this. Now, hopefully AI is going to help us rewrite some of this data. Some of the data from years ago might not be stuff that we might not even need now. But the point is that standardized data or structured data is going to be something that AI is looking for in our organization to be able to help make decisions and give recommendations to us. Separate general ideas or comments from formal lessons. Include both positive and corrective actions. Store the lessons so others can find and use them in future planning. And then lessons learned in retrospective template. If you don't already have a template, look for some out on the web, I think, for some drafts, and then turn around, use AI to create a draft for you. What went well? What did not work well? What should be improved? What should be preserved? What is the root cause of each problem? What is the priority ranking method? What is the action plan for implementation? And you might have more than just this. Those of you in regulatory situations, you probably do have some extra things in here that's beyond this. So that's okay, not a problem. And then what worked well? What helped the team succeed? What processes or practices should be repeated? Where did communication work well? What decisions were effective? What tools and meetings or workflows added value? Also, what strengths did the team demonstrate? Here, you're really being able to brag and to be able to praise your team for some good things, which is going to build some of that reinforcement there into that. What did not work well? We always seem to have some of these, don't we? And so what did not work well? So what slowed the team down? Where did confusion occur? What expectations were unclear? What risks were missed or underestimated? What handoff approvals or decisions caused delays? What should we avoid repeating? Once again, there is always going to be some places for hiccups for us to talk about. And then what should be improved? What needs to change before the next project or sprint? What process needs to be clarified? What decision-making practices need improvement? What communication channels need adjustment? What training resources or support are needed? And what should leadership address? And then what should be preserved? What practices should become standard? We've tried it. It's happened a couple of times and it's been better. We need to make this adjustment in our processes or practices. So what habits help the team perform well? What tools or templates should be reused? What team behaviors should be reinforced? And you can see this is a live situation here to where you're putting in new training, you're putting in new coaching and mentoring, and you're building in new skills. And so our skill development, our reskilling that we're talking about should be happening all the way until we decide to leave an organization. So what is the priority ranking method? Is this a critical priority that we're wanting to change? Is this strategic? Is it just a quick win for a few projects? Is it a low priority, but we think it still is needed? All of this will make a difference on how much emphasis will be put on some of these priority changes that we're talking about. All right, so let's bring this to a close and talk about a couple of things here for you. So future webinar, next month, we're going to be talking about inventing tomorrow's metrics, shaping the future of project management. And so we're going to be talking about what kind of metrics and where are metrics going, because we're going to be changing how we measure some things. As you look at AI in particular, AI is going to be in the workplace and is in the workplace today. And so it's going to change some of the metrics. And so here's a listing of the future webinars that we'll be looking at. And then we have one more free PMP mastermind class. And so this is a class that helps people get their application filled out, determine whether they're qualified, and they start answering. We answer a lot of questions, we answer a lot of questions for them with 2 Zoom calls in that class. And so we do 3 of these free each time. We do a drawing also, and so we give one free a boot camp away to one boot camp participant, and so that they can attend the boot camp for free. And everybody that attends gets a discount for coming to the PMP boot camp. So remember that the PMP is changing on July 9th. And so that's going to be a brand new test. And so the new material is already out. We've already taught 3 boot camps with it. And so we're getting a feel of where the changes are. They've also already changed it 2 more times since they rolled it out in April. So April 15th, they rolled out the new material. And so we've done 3 boot camps, and they've already changed it twice in that length of time. So they're still adjusting the material even now. Also, these are our virtual PMP exam prep boot camps. So we had one in June, so I should have taken that off, and I did not. We've got one in August, October, and December will be our last 3. These are all virtual. We do them every other month, and people can attend from all over the world. So we'd love to have you come and be part of this group with us. And then if I can help you in any way, don't hesitate to contact me. So you've got my email address here, you got our website. And so if we can help you in any way, we'd love to be able to work with you and do that. So let me thank you so much for being here and being part of this every month. It's so good to see you. And so I wish you well. I hope you have a wonderful summer. And so God bless you guys so much, and I'll see you next month. Okay? Bye, everyone. See ya.
Bye.